Europe, 1347. Ships arrive in the bustling ports of the Mediterranean, but they carry more than silk and spices. Hidden in the dark holds lies something far more deadly. Within weeks, entire towns fall silent. Within months, whole regions vanish from the map. What happened? And how could one invisible enemy bring a continent to its knees? The mid-14th century was a time of growth and trade in Europe. Cities like Florence, Venice, and Paris were thriving. Markets were filled with goods from across the world, thanks to busy trade routes connecting Europe to Asia and the Middle East. But trade didn't just bring wealth, it brought also travelers and animals. In October 1347, 12 Genoese ships docked in the Sicilian port of Messina. What the townspeople saw shocked them. Most of the sailors were dead. Those still alive were covered in large black swelling boils in their armpits and groins in blood and pus. The local authorities ordered the ships to leave immediately. But it was too late. The disease had already come ashore. We now know the culprit was the bacterium Yersinia pestis, spread by fleas living on black rats. But in the 14th century, no one knew about bacteria. Some believed it was a punishment from God. Others thought it was caused by foul air or miasma. Some even suspected poisoned wells or foreign plots. No matter the theory, one fact was clear. The sickness killed fast. Victims often died within 3 days of their first symptoms. From Messina, the disease traveled to mainland Italy, then across France and Spain. By the spring of 1348, it had reached Paris, London, and much of northern Europe. Trade routes became highways for the plague. Merchants and travelers unknowingly carried the infection from city to city. Even remote villages, far from the busy ports, were not spared. Daily life collapsed. Markets closed. Fields went unharvested. Families abandoned their homes. Priests, doctors, and even gravediggers refused to care for the sick, fearing they too would be infected. In many towns, the death toll was so high that mass graves were dug, whole communities buried together. Art from the time began to reflect the terror. Skeletons dancing with the living, grim reminders that death spared no one, rich or poor, young or old. Without understanding the cause, people turned to desperate measures. Some formed religious processions, whipping themselves in public to beg God's forgiveness. Others fled cities for the countryside, hoping isolation would protect them. But the plague seemed to follow everywhere. It didn't matter if you were a peasant in a remote hamlet or a nobleman in a fortified castle, if the rats and fleas reached you. So did the Black Death. By 1351, the plague had swept across almost all of Europe. The numbers are staggering. Historians estimate that between 30% and 60% of the population died. In some towns, there were no survivors at all. Entire families vanished. Trade networks collapsed. The economy crumbled, and social order was shattered. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the Black Death faded. By the early 1350s, new cases slowed, and the continent began the long, painful recovery. But the plague never truly disappeared. Outbreaks would return every few decades for centuries each. One a grim reminder of the horror of the mid-14th century. It would take hundreds of years before scientists understood the true cause. And by then, the Black Death had already reshaped Europe, forever changing its economy, its culture, and even the way people saw life and death. The Black Death was more than a plague, it was a turning point in history. It ended lives, but it also ended an age, ushering in profound changes that would shape the modern world. In the shadows of tragedy, history was rewritten. If you want to discover more stories that shaped our past, Subscribe to Visually History Explained and never miss the next chapter of history.